On December 21, 1941, at the request of President Roosevelt, a plan was formulated to bomb Japan. The concept was the idea of a naval submariner, Francis Lowe, who thought it would be possible to take medium bombers on aircraft carriers to bomb Japan in a surprise attack. The officer chosen to lead and formulate this plan was famed aviator Lieutenant Colonel James "Jimmy" Doolittle. The B-25B medium bomber was chosen as the best suited to carry out this mission. 16 B-25s with all volunteer crews were assembled at Eglin Field in Florida for retrofitting and training. The 16 B-25s were stripped of all extra weight, and additional fuel bladders were added to provide a maximum range. Pilots and crews underwent extensive top-secret training for the mission. The Norden bomb sites were removed and replaced with a specially designed site for the low-level bombing that would be used during the raid. The two 50 caliber machine guns in the tail cone of the plane were removed for weight reduction and replaced with two painted broom handles to give the appearance the plane was still armed from the rear. The normal takeoff distance for a fully loaded B-25 was approximately 1,500 feet of runway. Pilots and crews were trained to take off in no more than 450 feet, a feat which at its inception was not even known to be possible. The carrier Hornet, with 16 B-25s on her decks, left Alameda and San Francisco on April 2nd. Later they met the carrier Enterprise, which was the flagship of Admiral William F. Halsey, and proceeded west toward Japan. The combined task force consisted of 2 aircraft carriers, 4 cruisers, 8 destroyers, and a number of other assorted support ships. While en route to Japan, a special ceremony was held on the deck of the Hornet. Several Peace and Friendship Medals awarded by the Japanese government to U.S. servicemen before the war were assembled for the ceremony. It had been decided to appropriately return these medals to Japan by attaching them to several bombs. The bombs with the medals attached were to be returned to Japan by Ship No. 7, the Ruptured Duck, piloted by Lieutenant Ted Lawson. The plan was for the task force to sail undetected to within 400 miles of the Japanese homeland. The planes would then take off at night to fly to their targets in the cities of Tokyo, Nagoya, Yokohama, Kobe, and Osaka. After the raid, the B-25s were to fly to specified airfields in unoccupied China. Each B-25 was to carry its maximum bomb load, consisting of 3 500-pound bombs and 1 500-pound incendiary bomb. At approximately 7:30 on the morning of April 18th, the task force was still about 650 nautical miles from Japan when it was sighted by a Japanese patrol boat. The boat was sunk within minutes by gunfire from the USS Nashville. Because it was feared that the Japanese patrol boat would have had time to radio a warning to Japan, Doolittle and Hornet Captain Mark Mishner decided to launch the B-25s immediately, 10 hours earlier and 170 nautical miles farther from Japan than had been planned. The planes were quickly loaded with bombs and readied and positioned for immediate takeoff. Jimmy Doolittle, who piloted ship number 1, took off at 8:20 a.m. His aircraft had 467 feet of takeoff distance. Taking off from the Hornet was made even more difficult with the deck pitching and rolling in the rough seas. The remaining 15 B-25s took off within the same distance of 460 feet from the carrier Hornet. All 16 planes had taken off and were heading for Japan by 9:20 a.m. As the B-25s flew towards Japan, most in groups of 2 to 4 aircraft before flying single file at wave-top and rooftop levels to avoid detection. The aircraft began arriving over Japan about noon, 6 hours after launch, and bombed 10 military and industrial targets in Tokyo, 2 in Yokohama, 1 each in Nagoya, Kobe, and Osaka. Although some B-25s encountered light anti-aircraft fire and a few enemy fighters over Japan, no bomber was shot down during the raids. After the raid, 15 of the 16 aircraft then proceeded southwest along the southern coast of Japan and across the East China Sea toward eastern China, where several fields were supposed to be ready to guide them in using homing beacons. The raiders faced several unforeseen challenges during their flight to China. Night was rapidly approaching, the aircraft were all running low on fuel, and the weather was rapidly deteriorating. 15 aircraft reached the Chinese coast after 13 hours of flight and crash-landed or bailed out. One B-25 was extremely low on fuel and headed instead for the closer landmass of the Soviet Union. It landed safely approximately 40 miles from Vladivostok, where the B-25 was confiscated and its crew interned. Following the raid, most of the B-25 crews that came down in China eventually made it to safety with the help of Chinese civilians and soldiers. After crash landing in China, 2 crews were captured by the Japanese and sentenced to life imprisonment. 3 were later executed, and 1 died of malnutrition. The Doolittle raid sustained the following losses: 16 B-25s, 7 dead, 3 while crash landing along the China coast, and 8 POWs. After the raid, Doolittle felt that he had failed in his mission. With the loss of 16 planes and some of his men, he surely thought he would be court-martialed upon his return to the United States. But President Roosevelt awarded him the Medal of Honor, which he humbly accepted on behalf of all of the Doolittle raiders. He was also promoted to the rank of Brigadier General. Despite Doolittle's misgivings about the raid, it actually proved to be highly successful. The Naval Task Force was able to get within a few hundred miles of the Japanese homeland without being detected. The Japanese patrol boat which spotted the task force on the morning of April 18th apparently had not radioed Japan any warning. The Japanese were caught completely by surprise. It was thought that perhaps at least 60% of the planes and crews would be lost during the raid. However, all 16 planes dropped their bombs on their intended targets, and although the bomb damage was not significant, the fact that all 16 planes were successful on their missions and none were shot down during the raid and were eventually able to fly on toward China. Even though most of the planes crashed after running out of fuel, the majority of the men eventually made it to safety. The Doolittle raid had accomplished its intended effects. It was a large embarrassment to the Japanese military and recalled a lot of military resources and soldiers to protect the Japanese homeland. The raid also brought a badly needed huge boost of morale to the American people, which was one of President Roosevelt's desired intentions. The first Doolittle Raider reunion took place in 1945, with subsequent reunions throughout the years. 2012 marks the 70th anniversary of the Doolittle Raiders. This anniversary ceremony will be held at the National Museum of the United States Air Force in Dayton, Ohio. There are only 5 surviving Doolittle Raiders: Lieutenant Colonel Richard E. Cole, Major Thomas C. Griffin, Lieutenant Colonel Robert L. Height, Lieutenant Colonel Edward J. Saylor, and Master Sergeant David J. Thatcher. As part of the reunion, the surviving Doolittle Raiders gather in a private room to hold a solemn ceremony. 80 silver goblets, one for each of the 80 men who participated in the Doolittle raid, are set up in the room for the private ceremony. A roll call for the 80 men is given, with only the surviving raiders attending answering. A tradition by the surviving raiders of drinking a toast of brandy to all their fellow raiders is done at the ceremony. The individual silver goblets for the raiders who have passed on are turned upside down in the display case. This 70th anniversary may be the last for some of the few surviving Doolittle Raiders, as most are now well into their 80s.